what is going on in Geneva. Everybody's talking about Geneva today because not only Iranians but Russians as well. They're gonna negotiate. They are negotiating with the American, negotiators, which we know that is basically Steve Witkoff together with Kushner. And not much from Kushner, mostly Witkoff, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
What is the situation? Many controversies when it comes to the negotiations between Russia and the United States. Where are we with the negotiations?
Well, just technically and practically for everybody, yes, the meetings in Geneva are about to begin. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, has made it clear there'll be no press announcements today. They will not occur until tomorrow, so there'll be a 2-day period, and there'll be no real indication and no leaks, not at least from the Russian side, until tomorrow. So what we should focus on, what I know some of our audience find difficult to accept, is the enormous risk that President Putin is running now in the way in which he has divided these negotiations into the so-called economic cooperation team. That's really Kirill Dmitriev. That's a multi-point plan to give the United States pretty much everything they've sought for the return to Russia. Oil and gas companies to come back, their so-called losses compensated. We can go through the terms, and I've published them. These not only appeared in Bloomberg last week, I've been publishing them for more than a year now. And Bloomberg simply got a part of a memorandum of conversation that the Russian side does not deny to be authentic, that reflects Dmitriev's attempt to pacify the United States and put all trust in Trump to meet the promises he and his family have been bribed to accept, and he and his administration have been persuaded to accept as a new form of economic cooperation with Russia, including re-dollarization, which means the reversal of virtually all the major commitments that have been made to BRICS, to the Indian side, the Chinese side, and so on. That's the economic part. Now, there's been some controversy in the Russian press as to whether Kirill Dmitriev would be in the delegation in Geneva today. Late last week, it was reported that he would be, then he wouldn't be, and it's been clarified that he is in Geneva and he is meeting with Witkoff, Kushner, and Gruenbaum, but not at the table for the negotiations on the Ukraine war settlement. So essentially, what has happened is there's a bifurcated set of negotiations that leaving aside the Dmitriev group, there's the main Russian delegation on the Ukraine war, and that's been principally military and led by Igor Kostikov, the admiral in charge for the general staff of Russian military intelligence. And he was being accompanied in Abu Dhabi by two generals, General Zorin, General Fomin. It's unclear whether General Zorin and General Fomin are in Geneva, but the Russian side has sent more than 20 delegates. The leader of the delegation is Vladimir Medinsky. Medinsky is a junior ranking Kremlin assistant. Why does one send a junior ranking assistant to lead after replacing the senior military intelligence officer in Russia? Answer: Medinsky's taking his instructions from the president, and these instructions have been hotly discussed and debated and disagreed with in Moscow. And we can see the evidence of that. I know some in our audience don't want to accept the evidence of this. They don't even want to accept that Russia is a form of democracy in which the military can disagree with the commander-in-chief, in which the foreign minister can disagree with the president of the country, and so forth. But there's no doubt Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, has has indicated a serious set of disagreements with the terms that President Putin has seemed to offer on the Dmitriev plan, on the economic track. Why? Because Lavrov has said, and his deputy foreign minister, Sergei Ryabkov, repeated early this week, you can't trust the Americans. They have, in fact, escalated since the Anchorage, Alaska summit meeting. Now, the way in which this argument has been conducted in Moscow is through code words. The code words are Anchorage formula or Anchorage understandings. Each of the factions in Moscow say and believe different understandings were reached between Putin and Trump at their summit meeting in Anchorage last August. So each side says, yes, the Anchorage understandings, the Anchorage formula is the basis, but each side says they mean different things for addressing the military terms of settlement, the long-term security of Russia after the ceasefire, after the terms of settlement, the long-term future of Ukraine as a state, as an army, the forms of enforcing security so that the war will not be continued from whatever base is left of the Ukrainian regime. These are all terms that are yet unclear, okay? And the way this is debated with code words is either the Anchorage understandings have been violated by Trump himself, but not by Russia, or the Dmitriev plan. The Dmitriev plan is the other code word representing President Putin's short-term gambit. Some bankers I know have told me they think Putin is making a short-term bet that if he can bring the Americans back into Russia, re-dollarize, save the Russian oil and gas exports, he can reduce inflation, give the appearance of investment bonus, and boost the Russian economy from minus to plus. And the other evidence of how serious the internal situation is doesn't come from American podcasters who walk around Moscow saying how terrific things look to them. Just have a look at the central bank of Russia's analysis, its baseline scenario, its risk scenario, its projection of growth rates, both positive and negative. At best, the central bank of Russia says, and it too walks around Moscow, and it too buys at expensive shops. The central bank thinks the best growth rate could be this year between 1% and 2%. But the risk is -5 to -7%. The risks are spelled out by Elvira Nabiulina. On paper, in speeches, is very clear. They believe that a short-term fix with the Americans can save the Russian economy this year as it goes into its, as it were, midterm crisis. That's the parliamentary elections coming on September 20. So, summing up, what's happening in Geneva? What's happening is a bifurcation of the Russian negotiating team. Second, a different set of instructions for Dmitriev, opposed by the instructions that have gone to the foreign ministry and the general staff negotiators. And we've got a president betting that he can somehow reach accommodations that depend on a level of trust no official in the Russian government except Elvira Nabiulina and Kirill Dmitriev believe in. That's where we are. So it's very high risk. It's a gambit. It can be argued as sensible, but it's a bet, a wager. And what's it a wager on? Trust in Trump. And who trusts in Trump these days?
Yeah. John, you mentioned that within the Putin administration, there are some differences, which I think, in my opinion, it's normal to have
No,
these sort of
sure.
differences. And but what do you think that Kirill Dmitriev is talking every time he's talking with with the American part? Are they in contact with the foreign minister of Russia as well?
No, no. I mean, it's very clear, and it's been clear from the very first meeting of the new Trump administration negotiators in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia back in February a year ago. It's very clear there's immense hostility, personal and policy related, between Sergei Lavrov and Kirill Dmitriev. Kirill Dmitriev represents the oligarch, the big business constituency. And from then on, he has promoted himself. He has a Twitter stream. He does. He leaks and to the Western press. Bear in mind, Kirill Dmitriev was educated in a U.S. high school. He was educated in U.S. universities. He was educated through graduate school in the United States. He thinks he is and knows the United States better than other Russians. He also thinks and trusts Witkoff, Grunberg, Kushner, and the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, and he met with them in Miami over the weekend of January 31. Now, that's when the memorandum of conversation that was fed to Bloomberg, either fed by the US side to cause trouble on the Russian side, or fed by the Russian side to cause trouble for Dmitriev, or a summary of what officials knew was said. That's where Dmitriev formulated that plan. But that plan's been underway. I first reported the terms of, for example, concessions in the aviation sector, particularly to Boeing on the Russian side, back in an article called The Oligarch's Picnic, which we published back in January of last year. Dmitriev has political ambitions, he has business ambitions in Russia, and he thinks that he has replaced Alexei Kudrin, the former defense minister, former deputy prime minister, as President Putin's principal foreign economic advisor. And he's aligned with Elvira Nabiullina as the principal domestic economic advisor, along with Mr. Silyanov, the finance minister. These people have been negotiating with their counterparts for more than a year now. I'm sorry, did I answer your question?
Yeah.
It's two tracks.
Yeah. John, when it comes to the Ukrainian territory, we know that the Russian foreign minister said, I think it's obvious in his recent interviews, that the Novorossiya are going to be all part of Russia. Do you feel that way? It seems that he's talking about from Odessa going up to Kharkov, it's all be Novorossiya, and they're going to be part of Russia. And their people in Russia talking about even Kiev and everything eastward going to be part of Russia, if to be, to correct, the whole concept of Novorossiya. What is Novorossiya in the mind of the official Novorossiya, in the mind of the administration?
Well, how to respond? Because half of what you said, I think, is accurate. The other half is speculative. I'm not saying that any of these speculations are mistaken. They are all reasonable ambitions on the Russian side, given the threat that all of the Ukraine represents as a battlefield, a spearhead for the endless war against Russia that began, let's say, in 1917 and intensified after 45 and so on. Here we are today. Let's just go to the pieces. And let's be also clear that the officials engaged in direct negotiations on the Russian side have not discussed particular details. So what we can see as apparent consensus on the Russian and American side, but not clearly on the European and the Zelensky regime side, is the readiness to accept less than all of Novorossiya, excluding Odessa, excluding Dnipropetrovsk, excluding Kharkov. That is to say, the Russian side appears ready to accept the territories the Russian army has won at great cost of blood, but no retreat from where they are now, and no acceptance of the various schemes Zelensky's offered for turning the parts of Kherson and Zaporozhye that are not militarily won and occupied yet by Russia into some form of free trade zone and nonsense like that. So one of the apparent territorial concessions would be all of the Donbass, meaning Lugansk and Donetsk, all, and almost all of Zaporozhye and Kherson, but not Odessa and not Kharkov, neither the territories to the south and the west, nor the territories to the north. That's an apparent compromise, and I wouldn't bet money on how it will turn out at the moment. Second, you have the problem of the demilitarized zone. Going westward, what is the depth of the security zone in which no Ukrainian drone, missile, long-range artillery, or other form of a potential attack on Russia may be based? We know that the Ukrainians can fly long-range drones now from relatively deep into Western Ukraine. Let me say, I don't believe any Russian wants to occupy Kiev. No Russian wants the trouble of policing the Nazified Western Ukraine west of Kiev to the Polish border. The Germans occupied that area, and that area remains not only non-Orthodox and hostile to Orthodoxy, they are Catholics, they were Nazi sympathizers and collaborators during World War II. They would represent a constant form of terrorist resistance, costly in Russian lives. No one in Russia wants to occupy and regulate that zone. The problem from the Russian side is what sized army of the Ukrainians, what form of military equipment arming that army will be allowed, and whether there'll be any form of foreign European, NATO, American intelligence sharing, military supply systems in that rump army. And though we've seen lots of different numbers, there's no point in my view of talking about numbers ranging from 800,000 to 500,000 to 80,000. These numbers have appeared on papers, they've appeared in leaks. The principle's different. The principle is, how does the Russian side ensure that its security will be protected from what comes after? On the Ukrainian side, they want maximum security guarantees they call from a Russian attack. What they really want is to maintain their position as a fighting platform against Russia, armed by the Europeans, given intelligence data and information and support from the United States and NATO. So the two sides are way apart on this. Now, the Russian side, my sources say, are confident. They've been told by the Trump administration, we don't wish to continue backing the, let's call it the Kiev regime with intelligence sharing. If the Europeans want to do it, that's fine. If the Europeans want us to support them, that's possible. But will you hurry up and do what you have to do? That's Russian sources are saying to me that that's what the Trump regime is saying to them. They think that's the case. Whether that's true or not, we're going to find out. And it's different, quite different from the principal terms. The roots of the conflict is the formula, the slogan, the code word that the foreign ministry uses for the outcome. Roots of conflict to be resolved require not only the return of the Donbass, the security of all four, a settlement of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant in such a way that it can provide power as much to the the Russian side as to the Ukrainian side. The depth of the demilitarized zone, the DMZ, the method for policing the DMZ by drone, by international supervision, and so forth and so on. Not only the depth, but then when you get to Kiev, what regime with what kind of electoral mandate would return to power, and what would their commitments be to restore the Russian language, the Russian church, and a non-racist, non-Nazi or fascist form of ideology that's prevailed. And then what exists between Kiev and the Polish border that might involve NATO, US, and other forces. Those issues are the root conflict causes that have to be solved.
Yeah.
And I don't see them being solved in Geneva.